network to promote and publicize research and education relevant to the contributions, lives, impacts, and lasting legacies of U.S. First Ladies. I would like to begin by thanking our inaugural lifetime institutional members, American University, Rider University, the White House Historical Association, the Massachusetts Historical Society, the National First Ladies Library, the Center for Presidential History at Southern Methodist University, and tonight in the spotlight, our inaugural lifetime member, the Gerald R. Ford Foundation, with whom we are partnering on tonight's program. On April 7th of this year, Betty Ford would have turned 104. She is certainly one of our outstanding First Ladies. And for that reason, this evening, we're partnering with the Gerald R. Ford Foundation to bring you She Did All That, Betty Ford, Speaking Out, Saving Lives. And we are going to be joined shortly by the writer and director, Lisa Rafferty. I'd like to introduce at this point Cleves Whitney, the executive director of the Gerald R. Ford Foundation, and invite you to sit back and enjoy tonight's program.
Well, thank you very much, Myra. We at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation are honored to be your partner this evening and especially proud of our long-running institutional partnership. We know early in April, as you just indicated, was Betty Ford's birthday. So at Flair and at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, we celebrate Mrs. Ford's birthday month in recognition of her remarkable life and achievements. I was delighted to learn that TV Week recently, she actually features Betty Ford on its current cover. And actually it's Michelle Pfeiffer playing Betty Ford in Showtime's new series, The First Lady. But we are even more excited to host the West Michigan premiere of Lisa Rafferty's documentary play about Betty Ford called She Did All That, the subject of this evening's conversation. So if you're in West Michigan on the evening of April 20th, you can still get tickets for the West Michigan premiere of the play at our website, geraldrfordfoundation.org, all lowercase, geraldrfordfoundation.org. Many thanks are in order this evening to all of our friends at Flair for the terrific work you're doing on behalf of America's First Ladies, to Claire Schubert on our foundation staff, who has been a terrific liaison between the Ford and Flair, and of course, to playwright, director, and producer Lisa Rafferty, whose play celebrates the strength and resilience of our favorite hero, Betty Ford. I know I'm going to learn a lot from this evening's conversation, and I'm confident that you will too.
Hi, everybody. I am so delighted to be here talking about my favorite thing, Betty Ford and documentary theater. A lot of people, even in the theater world, don't necessarily know that much about exactly what is documentary theater. Everybody knows documentary film. And the short explanation is, like documentary film, this is the words of the people who live this experience as they're speaking them. But in this case, it's actors playing those characters. And so I want to start, before we get into a little bit about She Did All That and the documentary play about the unforgettable Betty Ford, I want to tell you a little bit about documentary theater. People always ask me, how did you get into documentary theater? What started this? And I want to share that with you because I'm a director, I'm a playwright, I'm a producer. I've been involved in theater my whole life. But in 2013, I was teaching at Bridgewater State University here in Massachusetts, where I live. And I was teaching there in spring of 2013 when the Boston Marathon bombing happened at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. And the next day, that was a Monday, Patriots Day, we have the day off here in Massachusetts. The next day I was driving into class and I was wondering, I was going to be the first class of the day. I was teaching at 8 a.m. And so I knew I would be the first professor to be with the students after this day had happened. And I knew we were all living with anxiety and fear about what had occurred. And one of my students at the time had emailed me that Monday night and said, I won't be in class. My National Guard unit has been called up to protect the city. He was an Iraq war veteran who was now getting his undergraduate degree. So I knew that I needed to tell the students about what their fellow classmate was doing, and I wanted to offer them a chance to express a little bit about what had happened. I pulled into the driveway of my university and I sat in the car for a minute and thought, still need to talk about theater. We still need to have class, but I need to give them an avenue for discussion about what happened. And I opened the textbook to look at the chapter that had been their assigned reading for the week. And there it was, documentary theater. And I thought, yes, this is the way in. So when I got to class, we all opened up and shared what happened. As you can imagine, as happens on horrible, unforgettable days like this, everybody is sharing what connection they had to the events. And I said, if we were to create a documentary play about what happened yesterday, who would we interview? And the answers came back fast and furious at me. First responders, runners, doctors, bystanders, spectators, right? From that day, that sat with me for a while. And a year later, I started a collaboration with another theater person here in the Boston area who had also done some undergraduate work in documentary theater. And we started creating what would be the documentary play Finish Line, which was about that day. And we interviewed over 100 people, the same people that had been mentioned in that class: doctors, nurses, first responders, spectators, runners, people, journalists who were there. And more about that, or I can answer more questions about that later. The process of that formed the basis for a process I would repeat, as it turns out, 9 times in 5 years. I've created nine plays in the past 5 years in this genre of documentary theater. And she did all that is one version of that. There's been, since that serendipitous day, that there's been a serendipitous nature to my work in documentary theater. On Veterans Day in 2016, my husband and I were at Ground Zero in New York, and as we approached the memorial to the South Tower, a woman was standing there and she started chatting with us, and she said, did you lose somebody that day? And we said, well, our neighbor lost their son. And she said, well, you're standing next to my son's name. And we looked down and the name was Wells Crowther. And because my husband went to Boston College and my daughter was at Boston College at that moment, we of course immediately knew his name. He was a 9/11 hero who died on the South Tower, who had graduated from Boston College. And so we knew a lot about him. He was known somewhat as the man with the red bandana. And from that serendipitous meeting with Allison Crowther, I reached out to her and I said, I'd like to create a documentary play about your son, Wells, to talk about his legacy, which she had shared his legacy with us that day, standing by his name. And I was so moved by what she shared that I started the process. I did interviews, I did research. I created a documentary play that was then a benefit performance at Boston College. The benefit proceeds went to the Wells Remy Crowther Charitable Trust, which uses education to spread the good word about Wells's legacy of kindness and courage and compassion that day. So that leads me to Betty Ford, and I'm going to be sharing my PowerPoint with you. So let me get to that. So the name of my play is She Did All That, Betty Ford Speaking Out, Saving Lives. And the way this started goes back also to 2016. My husband and I were with our son, who was going to be a freshman at the University of Michigan. It was July, and we were there for orientation. And if anybody here has students at Michigan, They might know that orientation is a 3-day event for the student and it's a 2-day event for the parents. So on the 3rd day, we were free to go visit the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library, which is on the campus of the University of Michigan, on the North Campus. By the way, many people here, I'm sure, know, but just in case you don't, I believe President Ford is the only person whose library and museum is in 2 different places. The museum is in Grand Rapids, his hometown. The library is, as I mentioned, on the Michigan campus. He went to University of Michigan, go Blue, and played football there. And so there's a fabulous library there on the campus. And so we were walking around the library on a sultry July afternoon. And I saw they have a recreation of his, I think it's his congressional conference room. And there's a glass tabletop, and slid underneath the tabletop were letters that had been written to the First Lady and to President Ford on various issues. And the one that caught my eye was from Maria von Trapp. And so I thought, oh, Maria von Trapp, theater, sound of music, huh? And I looked down and read it, and my eyes got very large because it was a very snippy letter to Mrs. Ford, to the First Lady. So I went out to the staff member that was there in the main room, and I said, why were Maria von Trapp's knickers in a twist? What's the story there? And he said, well, it was in response to what was a somewhat controversial interview with Morley Safer for 60 Minutes. And he said, but the Maria von Trapp letter is in contrast to the 50,000 cards and letters she got when she and President Ford opened up to the world about her breast cancer. And I'm a breast cancer survivor, and I didn't know that she had breast cancer. And so that immediately caught my interest. And that's kind of how the play started. So again, serendipity, Maria von Trapp, and interested to know more about how and what she did by changing the world with breast cancer treatment led to this play. I'm just going to go back for a minute and give you a little bit of an academic, shall we say, definition of documentary or verbatim theater. Verbatim theater is what it's referred to in the United Kingdom. Interestingly, the UK they're very prolific there with documentary theater. They have many practitioners who do it there. I suspect that if you ask the average UK citizen about verbatim theater, they would know exactly what you're talking about because they do it there so often. If I was able to do a good British accent, which I'm not, I leave that to my actors, I would do verbatim in a proper, what we would call RP, real pronunciation. But in the US, we mostly use the term documentary theater. And this is the definition here. The words that are highlighted are ones that are particularly relevant to the way I do theater, right? It's typically built on historical or archival materials using interviews, written or recorded interviews, newspaper reporting, government documents, biographies, and the like. These are the plays that I have created in the past 5 years, more or less. Finish Line, about the 2013 Boston Marathon. You'll see The Legacy of Wells Remy Crowther, The Man in the Red Bandana. The picture in the background is at the famous red bandana football game that happens at Boston College every year, when all the students, everybody in the stands get a red bandana, and the Crowther family is always in attendance. Last fall, I had the premiere at the Boston Public Library of Onward Votes for Women, which was a documentary play created to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. That was with music from the era as well. So it was a documentary play with music, or you could say a musical, sort of, kind of. And then several other pieces I did. No More Secrets was about survivors of domestic violence. Feeding Sisters is about a beautiful organization in Boston called Women's Lunch Place. It's a day facility for those who are homeless or addicted to come and get treated with dignity at a sit-down lunch 5 days a week. COVID Unfolding was created in March, April, and May of 2020, based on interviews of what was happening at the time. The squad is about the members of Congress who call themselves a squad. It's a larger squad now. This was back a couple of years ago. And the students of Bridgewater State and I created a documentary theater piece. It was 3 short plays in one evening: Removing the Mask, Growing Up Stories, and Screenshot. These are just some photos from my documentary plays that I thought you can see where the American flag is. That is on Wells's name at Ground Zero. So if you ever go to the 9/11 Memorial, you can go to the South Tower Memorial and find Wells's name, and you'll probably see a red bandana there. If you go inside the museum, you'll also see, of course, the memorial to Wells. When the 9/11 Museum opened, President Obama was the keynote speaker, and he opened his keynote speech with the story of Wells. He was, in fact, the only single person mentioned by President Obama in his keynote speech. And that speech verbatim is in the play. The gentleman in the bow tie, red bow tie with the red bandana on the right side is an actor playing Wells's father, Jefferson Crowther. And the big picture in the middle is the suffragists showing power in their opening number in Onward, Votes for Women. So what is the process? Interviews and research. In the case of She Did All That, it was more heavily on the research than it was on interviews, right? Because there was so much historical information available to me. But I did do several interviews, including one with Don Holloway, who was the curator at the museum at the time, and he is represented as a character in the play. Transcriptions, it says 3 to 8 times as long as the interview. That is how long, when I teach a class in documentary theater, I tell the students that it will take you 3 to 8 times as long as the interview to transcribe it, because you must transcribe manually. It can't be a computer transcription. It has to capture every syntax, every nuance of how the person spoke, and that can only really be done properly manually by listening to it and then creating a transcription. So then I create a draft version of script, version 1, which themes always emerge from the research and the interviews, right? It always becomes pretty clear as you go with the direction the script is going to take. For instance, with Onward, about suffrage, I had to dive into the research, and I'm like, oh my goodness, good Lord. Seneca Falls was 1848. The 70 years later, the 19th Amendment finally passed. That's a long time to distill into what we hoped would be a 65-minute play. 65 minutes, 70 years in 65 minutes. So you're grateful for things that emerge and can help you shape script version number 1. Then you typically gather actors for a table read, which is exactly what it sounds like. You sit in a conference room, you sit around a table with actors and a small audience, and you read the play for the first time. You revise the script, you do more interviews and research, then you do a workshop with a larger number of people and a little bit more staging, and revise the script, more interviews, more research, and sometimes you do a developmental or preview run of the production. By the way, by the time the show is produced formally on stage, you're probably on script version, I don't know, 28, 52, 79, many versions later. This leads me to She Did All That. She Did All That started out as a 1-act play about Mrs. Ford's first 2 years in the White House as First Lady. It focused mostly on how she opened up the national conversation about breast cancer. So the two visual images you see on the top are from that one-act version of She Did All That, which that version was done as a benefit performance for the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, which is where I got my treatment, and of course is renowned around the country for incredible cutting-edge healing treatments for all kinds of cancer. From there, I actually was lucky enough to receive a research grant from the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, and that research grant enabled me to go back out to Michigan. That's when I got to interview Don Holloway. That's when I did more research and found out more information, incredible information about Mrs. Ford and everything she did, and was able to then go through the same process again to workshop a full-length version. The version that's going to be seen in Michigan next week is also, it's a slightly abridged version, so it's also about 65 minutes. This was, the picture on the left is just some of the resources I used when I was doing a deep dive into the First Lady. Anybody who's done similar work for her will probably recognize many of these resources. There's a picture at the top, that's Mrs. Ford when she appeared on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was a great deal of fun. The picture in the middle is of some of the boxes that are archived at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library. Those are boxes I went through to find material for the piece. The picture on the right that says Letters to Betty, this formed an important component of the piece. They were some of those original 50,000 cards and letters that she received, including letters from children who sent her get well cards and the like. Of course, it's important. The play doesn't focus on this so much, but we all know who love and admire all the courageous work that she did and all the unforgettable work she did, that she did so much for the Equal Rights Amendment. One of the things that I was so pleased about in the play about suffrage was once the 19th Amendment passed, the suffragists themselves needed something else. They had felt this sense of purpose. They had felt this sense of fulfillment in working together for this important, very important cause. And so Alice Paul, one of the leading suffragists, then went to law school. I believe she got 2 law degrees, and she drafted the language for the Equal Rights Amendment. And in the play Onward, that's how I moved the play into contemporary times, is through the prism of the Equal Rights Amendment. And of course, that gave me then the excuse to include Betty Ford as a character in Onward. So I was so pleased to do that. And of course, it's a verbatim speech she gave on the Equal Rights Amendment in Onward. Finally, you'll see a picture, you'll see the picture on the previous page of her being interviewed by Morley Safer for the famed 60 Minutes interview. And that 60 Minutes interview is also verbatim in the script. And in fact, my costume designer in Boston, where the play first appeared, was able to replicate that 60 Minutes dress that she had on, dress and scarf, which you can also see the original dress in the Gerald R. Ford Museum in Grand Rapids. The picture of the library where it all started, another picture of the box, the archive box, the picture in the middle of the First Lady throwing a football to Gerald Ford. This was a really incredible moment, which is also mentioned in the play. This is just, I can't even remember, a day or 2 after her mastectomy. Pretty amazing. If anybody else has had a mastectomy, you know how really incredible that was, that she was able to do that. And I think President Ford got a big kick out of her ability to do that. And just this moment between them, showing the grace and the humor that I found over and over and over again, and everything I read about her and about them was very important for me to include in the play. On the left is a pool report, a White House pool report, which I had access to all the pool reports from her time going through breast cancer surgery and treatment. And those are represented in the play as White House reporters. The picture on the bottom right, I hope it's on the bottom right on your screen, is a sample of one of her speeches where you can see she would get the index cards with these speeches and then she would make edits herself before she gave the speeches. This is what the character list looks like. A lot of people think that when they say, oh, a play about Betty Ford, they think it's a one-woman show, because I certainly understand why they think that. And I say, no, it's actually over 30 characters. So this kind of shows you the list of characters. It's the Ford family. It's the journalists. As I said, we call them White House reporters. I use the historian as sort of a narrator for the whole thing to tie it all together. The citizens who wrote to her, and you'll see Maria von Trapp, she makes an appearance reading her letter. And of course, Phyllis Schlafly, because what's drama if there's no conflict? So we need to know, not only was Maria von Trapp not a fan, but neither was Phyllis Schlafly. But then there were a lot of celebrities who have gone on record as talking about what the Betty Ford Clinic did for them and for their sobriety and how important that was. The script is verbatim. You'll see I have an asterisk that says denotes word added for clarification. Every once in a while, there's maybe, I don't know, 8 asterisks in this particular piece. I have to change a pronoun or I have to change a word for clarification purposes. My note about Betty Ford is this piece offers a look into the life of an extraordinary first lady. She broke down societal taboos and she empowered women throughout the United States. It begins shortly after her husband became president in an era of political and economic turmoil in the United States. It goes on, it talks about her forthright dialogue about her addiction issues and her advocacy on recovery. Of course, I did not know about her advocacy and coming forth about breast cancer. It changed the lives of thousands of women at a time when the disease was rarely discussed or acknowledged. I did not know about her early support of people with AIDS, of course, the Equal Rights Amendment, her welcoming of Vietnam refugees, her work with disabled children, her commitment to mental health care, and her early embrace of marriage equality for gays and lesbians. This shows you the evolution of the different versions of the play. On the left, with the cast sitting on the edge of the stage, that was the Dana-Farber benefit performance. Below them is the workshop cast of the full-length version. In the middle, with the cast standing at music stands, that's actually in New York City at the Dramatists Guild, where we did a workshop there with New York City actors. And very fun. The actor on the far right, sitting next to the man who's standing up, her name is Jennifer Giles, and she's a former Rockette. And so as Mrs. Ford was an extraordinary dancer in New York City, she was played by a Rockette. So that was kind of a fun part of the whole thing. The picture on the far right is a workshop cast of the original one-act version. And the woman who played Betty Ford there, who's from Boston, she's an extraordinary actor here in Boston, grew up in Grand Rapids, and her father was one of President Ford's lawyers before he was president. So there's all these serendipitous connections to Mrs. Ford. Here's some pictures from the Boston cast. That is Paula Plum and Richard Snee. If you're in Boston, you will know their names. They're extraordinary actors here in Boston, and they are married in real life. So it was really wonderful to have them play the president and first lady. The picture on the upper right is of actor Stephanie Cloutier playing Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. In documentary theater, what's typical is that an ensemble cast plays multiple roles. In the case of She Did All That, there's one actor for Betty Ford and one actor for President Ford, but the rest of the ensemble plays multiple roles. And there is some fluidity with things like gender and sometimes race, sometimes type is more fluid in documentary theater. The picture at the bottom is of actor Dave Daly, who played Jefferson Crowther in the Wells Crowther piece and was the historian narrator in Betty Ford. Here you can see Paula Plum in the 60 Minutes dress. This costume traveled to Michigan and will be seen in Grand Rapids next week on our incredible Grand Rapids actor, Nancy Wagner, who's just doing an extraordinary job playing Betty Ford. The actor in the tan coat is playing Don Holloway. His name's Tom Grennan. He's a Boston actor, different actor. It's an all Grand Rapids cast in Grand Rapids, which really makes it special. Those three women at the bottom are the White House reporters. The woman in the powder blue suit is a real life television reporter who came in and did a cameo. And then it's a cast picture. I'm going to stop the share for a minute. I will tell you that when I was standing over that letter from Maria von Trapp and was thinking about what it all meant, and then learning about the cards and letters and learning more about Betty Ford's extraordinary life, her candor, her courage, her wonderful, wonderful sense of humor. In thinking about that moment, standing over Maria von Trapp's letter, I wonder if in some serendipitous way, Mrs. Ford wasn't tapping her hand on my shoulder and saying, "Can you believe this about Maria von Trapp? How about a play about this? Why don't you tell the story through a play?" And I'm only too proud and honored to be telling her story in her own words and in the words of President Ford and Susan Ford and the family members, which to me, I'm a playwright. I also write plays that are not documentary theater. I write comedies about motherhood, where I'm writing all the dialogue. But in this case, it is my honor to represent people like Wells Crowther and Allison Crowther and Jefferson Crowther and the Ford family and those around them through the words that they themselves said. It's different, for instance, than what you'll see if you watch Michelle Pfeiffer as Betty Ford. That is a fictional script created from the minds of the writer and created by the director. And I know we're going to take questions from which I'd be delighted to answer. And maybe I go back and talk about more of this as we go through questions.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for giving us background on documentary theater and talking about some of your past productions. And we do have a number of questions. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is to ask, what did you learn about researching at presidential libraries?
That there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. I remember when Jim, the archive technician at the library, said, "Which of her speeches would you like to look at?" And I said, "I don't know. How many are there?" And he said, "Let me give you a printout of all the speeches." And I, wow, she was a prolific speaker. She gave many speeches, dozens, hundreds of speeches. So as any writer knows, editing or cutting down to its essence is an important part of writing. So yeah, that was one of the things I learned. It takes discipline to not get overwhelmed by the amount of material available to you. That's why I'm very glad for the forces larger than myself that I feel are acting on me that help guide me through this. So,
okay, if I remember correctly, though she was in the White House only for 2.5 years, she gave about 100 speeches, which certainly is a fair amount of speaking. We have another question. What did Betty Ford do as First Lady that most resonates with you?
So, and I realize I never did excerpts from the script. So if we have time, I'll share some of those on the screen with you and read them out loud. It's easy to answer that question in one way, because it goes back to why it all happened in the beginning. In the one-act version of the play, when we did the Dana-Farber benefit performance, one of the interviews I did was with my own radiation oncologist, who he's a renowned Dr. Joe Barthold. He's a renowned radiation cancer oncologist here, radiation oncologist here in the Boston area. And to this day, when he's in his intake appointment with new patients, he talks about the impact that Betty Ford and Happy Rockefeller had on breast cancer, and how by them speaking out and by their husbands speaking out about this, it changed research, it changed treatment, it opened the doors, it saved lives, it started mammograms happening. And so that had a direct impact on my own life, right? I can trace in a straight line from Betty Ford to me being healed and being treated and being alive today to tell this story, right? And Dr. Barthold's interview was the coda in the one-act version. It was the final, he got the final word in the one-act version, of course, told through an actor, but yes, he got the final word.
I'd like to remind all of our viewers that Flair did a program about Betty Ford and breast cancer in October. It is on our website and you can easily access it. It is open to the public. We have another question. Were the actors familiar with Mrs. Ford and the whole story before they were cast? And what was their initial reaction to the script?
Wonderful question. So, two things. One is, in Boston, the cast, either they were too young, a lot of them were way too young to really know or appreciate what happened. Or it's just from a different part of the country, right? They didn't know about the Ford family to any degree. And so they loved when we did like a table read or a workshop where nobody knew anything, they had the same reaction that the audience ended up having in Boston and in this area. Wow, I had no idea. She did all that. Right. So I had no idea.
Very slick.
So what's been wonderful is working with a Grand Rapids cast. It's just the opposite, right? And I've been saying it would be like if I did a documentary play on the Kennedys, right? In Boston, your grandfather, your uncle, your mother, your neighbor, everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows every story. We all go down to the Cape where they all were on Hyannis. Everybody knows everything. But so it would be like if I did a documentary play about the Kennedys in Grand Rapids, sure, people know, but they don't know, right? They don't know. In Grand Rapids, it's absolutely fabulous to be working with Michigan actors who feel the connection and have these connections to the story and to the president and to the first lady. And, but hopefully still the audience might say, I did not know that, hopefully.
In August of 1975, Mrs. Ford did what became a very controversial interview with CBS's Morley Safer. And I'm wondering, and the person who posed this is wondering, what did you think about that interview?
So it's, of course, it's why Maria von Trapp's Snickers were in the twist. And by the way, Maria von Trapp didn't just write a snotty letter to Mrs. Ford. She then wrote an even worse letter to President Ford. Worse, okay? So I put both letters in the play because I was just outraged that she had done this. And I felt like it was worthy of putting in. People need to know that she did this. So yeah, so that the 60 minutes, let me actually share the screen for a minute and go to, so I'm gonna go to, so this is me scrolling through the script, right? You can see the reporters, for instance, these are lifted from those pool reports from the White House pool reports at the time. According to Dr. William Lukash, Mrs. Ford was seen at Bethesda Naval Hospital and all the tests and physical findings were considered to be completely normal with no evidence of cancer recurrence, right? And so these parts will be played by Michigan Grand Rapids television reporters who will be coming on and playing television reporters. So very meta. If we scroll down just a little bit, you'll see the historian, the narrator character, saying basically what Myra just said. Catapulted from suburban housewife to the nation's first lady a year earlier, Betty Ford rapidly established a reputation for candor and a willingness to talk just about anything. Well, she did. She talked about just about anything. And so this is verbatim from that interview. Nancy Wagner, playing the First Lady, will be in her 60 Minutes outfit. And Tim Patriga, who is the vice president at Mary Free Bed Rehab Hospital in Grand Rapids, which was started by Mrs. Ford's mother and other members of the Guild back in the early part of the 19th century. Tim will be playing Morley Safer, and they will recreate the 60 Minutes interview. And here it is. So you can see she talks about putting a woman in the cabinet. Wow, it's big news. She talks about, this was the controversial part, young people living together before they're married. And she said about, well, what if Susan Ford, if she found that out about her daughter, Susan, who was 17 at the time, maybe 18, I would think she's a perfectly normal human being, like all young girls. If she wanted to continue, I would certainly counsel and advise her on this subject. And then Morley opened up about abortion. Roe v. Wade had just been made the law of the land. And she said, well, if you ask a question, you have to be honest. I feel very strongly that it was the best thing in the world, right? So this is what got Maria's knickers in a twist, and other people too. Jerry said this, I don't want to, I'm in no position to do President Ford. Rick Albin, who is a well-known anchor, news anchor in Grand Rapids, will be playing President Ford. Here's Maria's letter. Dear Mrs. Ford, picture this with an Austrian accent, would you, please? You may have noticed what an outrage was raised all over the country by your flippant remark on television. By way of introduction, I want you to know that I am the real Maria from The Sound of Music. As such, I'm very much in the limelight. All during the summer, people come in busloads from around the country to meet me, take my picture, and get my autograph. I only say this that you may understand that I really meet hundreds of people every day, and I can assure you, you have done great damage to your husband's political aspirations. Both of you have lost a great deal of respect and goodwill among the people of the United States. Do you realize how much harm you have done to the American family and to the American youth? I pray that God will give you the necessary insight. Please, Mrs. Ford, have the courage to step before the camera again and try and undo some of the damage. I won't read the whole letter to President Ford, but she does say near the end, you simply must tell your wife to shut up and keep shut up in public, which I feel it's a bridge too far for me. I have to say, it's a bridge too far. Oh, by the way, she says, all this, I say this because I mean well. Sincerely yours, Maria Von Trapp.
When I teach about the 60 Minutes interview in my First Ladies class, my students comment that even though it's so many years later, many of the things that Mrs. Ford said were controversial. They don't disagree, but they find that they're controversial. We are coming to the end of our hour together, Lisa, and I have a few more questions for you, but I was wondering if there were any other excerpts from the play that you wanted to share.
One more. I want to share one of the lovely letters.
Sure.
This letter this is from citizen number 8. This letter will be read by Mayor Rosalind Bliss of Grand Rapids in the show. So if you're coming, you'll get to see Mayor Bliss read it. She'll read it much better than I will. Dear Mrs. Ford, I read that the public relations people are worried that your straightforward answers to questions will cost the president votes in 1976. I hope you will not become silent or modify your views to suit assumed public opinions. Americans do not have to be fed pablum to be contented. Truthfulness, good leadership, and good example will go a long way. The society is constantly changing, and our leaders, and we have so few women leaders, should show that we can adjust to the changes. It is refreshing to have a person in the White House whom Americans, and especially American women, can respect and learn from. If the president permits his advisors to silence you before the election because you are an independent thinker, I and many other women in my age group will be very disillusioned.
We should also add that, and I see that it's in your script, that President Ford was asked by reporters if he thought that Mrs. Ford's comments had lost him votes. And to his eternal credit, Gerald Ford said, well, when I watched it on television, I said it was about 10 million, but reading it this morning in your news stories, I've raised the estimate to 20 million. So he was very good-natured about it and rolled with the punches. One more question for you, Lisa. Mrs. Ford wrote a letter to the many people who had written to the White House or phoned telling them how upset they were with her comments. And we're wondering, did you find anything about her reaction to the New York Times publishing the story, or just generally her reaction to how people dealt with that letter that she put together?
No, I don't have any. I didn't come across anything about that. That's fascinating to me. So
yeah, she did write a letter to all of the people who doubted her, and it really did help to turn public opinion around. So, yeah.
All right, more research, version number, whatever.
Okay.
Coming up.
If you had more opportunity to do research or to continue looking at Mrs. Ford, where would you want this to go now?
The play itself, or if I were to develop the play further, or where would I want the play to go?
If you were to develop it further.
That's easy to answer, actually. I would want to do something a little different with it. I'd want to bring in now and contrast things that she spoke about that were so important that we're actually facing now. For instance, as you know, several states have since ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. We're still trying to get it done, That's still in the news. So I would want to interweave news stories about those same issues that she was trying to address and that she was being a leader in sharing. I would want to interweave what's happening now. And of course, some of the more controversial issues that we see are around the country today. What she was talking about in 1974 is back in the public eye today. So I'd want to weave it in. I'd still want to do it documentary style, though. Not my opinion, but in the words of interviews and news sources of today.
Lisa, on behalf of Flair, I'd like to thank you for your comments and your observations about Mrs. Ford. I'd also like to thank Cleves Whitney, once again, the executive director of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. Thank you to Flair Treasurer and our IT person for these broadcasts, Diana Carlin, and Rosie Kane from American University, who has been helping us. And thank you so much, Rosie. Let me tell you again that Lisa's play is going to be seen in Western Michigan next week on the 20th, and you can get tickets through the Gerald R. Ford Foundation. They are at geralrfordfoundation.org. She's done all that about Betty Ford. From Flair, I'd like to announce that our program about First Lady's speeches that was first seen this past fall is going to be on C-SPAN on April 23rd at 2:45 in the afternoon. And Flair will be presenting another program soon. Please watch our website, flair-net.org, for further announcements. Lisa, again, thank you. Cleves, many, many thanks for the opportunity to partner with the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. And good night to everyone. Whether you're celebrating Easter or Passover, we hope it's a good weekend for you. Good night.